Tonight's workshop. Tonight is September 10th, 2024. We're so grateful that you've joined us. Thank you to my fellow board members who are here tonight. Thank you to the staff from Hartford Public Schools and all of our partners that are here tonight to talk to us. And I will go ahead and turn it over to the superintendent to discuss the assessment data. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's great to be here. I mean, it is just 2 weeks into the school year. So thank you for joining us. If Ms. Santiago, if you can please share our agenda for this first portion of the meeting. And then yes, thank you. And if you can go to the next slide, please. We will be reviewing the state accountability language and some of the tools that they use to measure the results so that we can all just kind of ground in some common language in terms of metrics and key terms. Then we'll take a look at statewide trends, including how Hartford's performance compares to that of the state and also peer districts, right? Because context matters. And then we'll do a deeper dive into our outcomes, which include state assessments on academic growth and proficiency, as well as some culture and climate data, including attendance. And then relative to process, chairperson, just checking in, I'll pause a few times throughout the presentation to allow for either clarifying questions or just a pause and allow time for questions and comments. And is that okay with you for a process?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Great. And then team, usually, just to let you know, usually we have our Senior Director of Data and Accountability, Abby Olinger-Quint, present. However, she's not able to be with us this evening, so I will be presenting. And then if we need to tag in any team members, we will do that. Ms. Santiago, if you will, the next slide, please. So just to anchor on some background knowledge, student performance is measured and reported by the state in 3 subject areas: math, English, and science. In the interest of time, and because science is not explicitly rooted in what we were using as a scorecard, tonight's presentation will focus on math and English. And then which test a student takes is actually dictated by their grade level and the content area. For example, the Smarter Balance Assessment, which you you will hear us refer to as SBAC, is an annual assessment that involves the Connecticut core standards in ELA, English Language Arts, literacy, and math. And this is for students in grades 3 through 8th grade only. And then for our older students, you might be familiar with the Scholastic Aptitude Test, which is the SAT, and it measures the skills and knowledge using questions that the research shows are most important for college and career success. So for example, if a student meets the SAT benchmark, it generally means that they have a greater chance of earning a C or higher in a college level course. We go to the next slide, and I know that the next slide has a lot of content, and I'll only lift a few of these. Right, these are definitions for the language that is used by the state. Performance index, for example, is the measure that summarizes student scores in a composite scale from 0 to a 100 range. This is not a component of our scorecard, but it is a useful measure to show overall performance and to begin to recognize some trends. One term that you might have heard us talk about is proficiency, and that describes a student's one-time academic performance in math and ELA as it relates to their grade level. Growth is the change in achievement score for the same student between 2 or more points in time. A growth target is set by the State Department of Education, and it describes how much growth a student needs to demonstrate on the next assessment. Our growth targets are actually aligned to the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is ESSA, the federal law that shapes and has shaped for quite some time now achievement testing, accountability, reporting, and even education funding policies. And the last one that I think I'll call out is average percentage of target achieved, APT. This measure represents the percentage of their individualized growth targets that students are meeting on average. I know those are a lot of terms, but I just wanted to lift a few of them that you either have heard us talk about or will continue to hear us talking about. In the next slide, for just a little more context, you have seen these numbers before. Again, right, this is our snapshot just for the community that might be viewing us today or in the future. This is a snapshot of our school community and the individuals that we show up for every single day. And you see here, I do want to call out a couple things. So we have increased our teachers of color from 23% to 30%. And I like to kind of highlight that, given that it was an area that the Board of Education lifted as a priority, but also because we know how important it is that our students are able to identify with individuals that they can see themselves in, and all of our students, right, benefit from a diverse talent pool workforce. And compared to the state, I heard today officially that the state is at 11% for educators of color, and so we want to celebrate that. And a few key other numbers here. And I think I referenced this at the last board retreat, which was the growth in the number of multilingual learners that we have from 21%. You see now we're at 26%. And I actually am lifting that number along with, for example, special education students at 21%, because I want you to keep those numbers, those percentages in mind as we go through this presentation, especially when we do comparative displays relative to state averages. Context matters significantly, and if we go to the next slide, please, I'll contextualize it a little better. Right, some of those, numbers for multilingual learners, special education, the fact that nearly, when we look at the entire student body, 75%, qualify for free or reduced lunch. When we look here at this data display, those are some qualifiers for students that are considered high needs. And high needs is a term, a group, is a super group, if you will, that the state uses for analysis. And based on the state definition, a student is considered high needs if they meet one or more of the following criteria. Student that is considered low income as measured by their eligibility for free or reduced price lunch. And in districts like Hartford, when you wonder as to how that eligibility is determined, it is determined via the students that are eligible for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or other assistance programs. And so we're going to see through this presentation, you'll see, for example, that the pandemic has had a significant impact on student learning and performance, and that decline holds true across all subgroups and districts. And the decrease in overall performance, however, has been intensified by the way that the pandemic has impacted this specific group of students, right? Those considered our highest needs students, um, all of which attend Hartford Public Schools at a much higher rate than the state average, as you see illustrated here. And as I just called out, right, in the previous slide, right, 26% multilingual learners, our special education, over 70% of our students facing, right, economic circumstances that qualify for assistance. And these challenges from the pandemic are further exacerbated by right, our statewide staffing shortages in these specific areas, right? Special education, multilingual support staff, and it just impacts Hartford Public Schools in a heightened manner because of the concentration of need in Hartford, right? Staffing shortages in special education, bilingual, social workers, for example, like it has a disproportionate um, and a district-wide impact. And so I just wanted to situate the terms and the context within Hartford as we're going to compare Hartford and the state. In our next slide, as we kind of do an aerial view, the data that we're going to review tonight was released by the State Department of Education on August 28th. And the trends across the state include, for example, that the state saw for a second year in a row an improvement in chronic absenteeism, resulting in a reduction in CA chronic absenteeism from 20% to 17.7%. Again, this is state level trends. Connecticut showed a second consecutive year of overall improvement in math and science. The performance index from, for example, 21-22 saw an improvement, but there's still a lag relative to pre-pandemic numbers by 3 points in math and 2 points in science. Relative to English language arts, ELA, that performance index was unchanged from 22-23, from the 22-23 school year, lagging pre-pandemic by almost 4 percentage points. At the state level, there was an improvement in ELA SAT by more than 2 percentage points, while math, actually, SAT across the state saw a regression by nearly 5 percentage points. And we'll see when we review our data that there are some of the same trends that we see here in our local context. Next slide, please, Ms. Santiago. Thank you. So just to ground us in this visual and actually the layout that we're going to kind of continue through the rest of the presentation, this is a graph that shows the state averages on the left side, and then a comparison of alliance districts. These are districts that have the lowest accountability index, and opportunity districts, which actually is a subset of those alliance districts. And so then you'll see that Hartford, right, is on the right-hand side. So the blue represents ELA, English Language Arts, and then math is in the orange. And you see that they are different shades. The lightest shade of each of those colors represents 2018-19, right, pre-pandemic, and then the darker shade is 23-24. So this slide shows the visual that I was just speaking about relative to, in the previous slide, relative to performance and the state's measure for overall achievement in a content area. The target for 23-24 at the state level, the state target was 75 for all schools and districts. What you see here is that the state and subsets of the state, right, there's a lot of work still that we have to do to get to that target of 75. The statewide pattern of decline in English language arts and minimal gains in math as it relates to the performance index prior to the pandemic is consistent with what we experienced in Hartford Public Schools. right? The shape of each set of the bars, if you see, it's almost identical across the subgroups. And these trends are they're not unique to Hartford or to the state of Connecticut. It's fairly consistent across the country. Um, and many districts are seeing the same regression or stagnation as we all kind of come to terms with, like, right, that cumulative impact of the pandemic on student learning and achievement. So these results are not just representative of what happened over the last school year, but are, right, representative of what has happened with the return from the pandemic, right? The impacts of that cumulative and compounding as a result of all of those shifts and pivots, classroom, remote, hybrid, and then in 21, 22, right, in-person learning that was consistently interrupted by the COVID outbreaks and various variants. And while the last few years have been more normal, and we saw gains in attendance, like, we still have to look at the data and think about the amount of learning recovery from the pandemic and the time that it takes. So let's see, just checking in for a pause before I dive into the next set of slides. If there's any clarity, thumbs up to move on. Okay, thumbs up. Next slide, please. Still kind of looking at statewide. This is a scatter plot of all of the districts in Connecticut, 196 that report, right, that have their testing. So horizontal axis shows the 23-24 performance index for English language arts with that 75 target indicated by a vertical line. Right, the vertical axis represents the improvement since 2018-19, right? That's pre-pandemic. The size of the bubble represents the number of students in a district. Right, so the bigger the bubble, the bigger the enrollment. You see where we are, right? You see the blue with the little yellow star in the center. And I think the major headline here is that, right, it's clear that the vast majority of districts are below that the 2018-2019 performance. And those districts that have met or exceeded that standard are relatively smaller in terms of student enrollment, at least compared to Hartford Public Schools, right? You see the 23 districts up above on the top there of the total of 196 districts. So those are the districts that have either met or exceeded the pre-pandemic ELA performance. And then if we look at math, so it's the same thing, right? Below the line, above the line. Math is a slightly better story in terms of the number of districts, right? You see that 41 out of the 196 districts are meeting or exceeding pre-pandemic performance. But once again, districts that are relatively smaller in enrollment. Okay. So before I'll begin now to kind of focus more in on Hartford Public Schools. This is a look at, oh, next slide, please. Thank you. A look at the district scorecard. It is something that this is language that has changed and the scorecard is kind of outdated, but I did want to share the progress that we've seen progress in nearly all of our measures, with the most significant progress being made in around culture and climate, which was something else that, right, our board was very explicit about relative to for us to focus on around connecting our students and making, right, when students came back from the pandemic and making sure that they felt connected. And so as you see here, we have seen progress, but we've exceeded our graduation rate goals and our goals for access towards advanced courses. We're going to dive into all of that. But this is a not only an aerial view, but across the years, if you will. The other headline here is also the amount of work that still has to happen. While we have made gains, you see that in the column that's, the change from the 22-23 to the 23-24 school year. There's still the gaps to get to the goal. We have to continue to focus on. Okay, now we can dive into additional data here. So just a quick reminder of one of the terms that I referenced earlier in an earlier slide, APTA, the average percent of target achieved, is the average percentage of growth target achieved by students. Right, we talk about the fact that we want all of our students to grow at least one grade level. And I know that for our board members, we'll be discussing what that target is. And here you see the pattern this pattern will repeat. First, we show here Hartford Public Schools in the context of state, alliance, and opportunity districts. And you'll see here that the rate of growth in both ELA and math for Hartford and peer districts are lower than that of the state. However, the shapes are the same. The Hartford and Opportunity District rates of growth in ELA are similar to rates before and right after the pandemic. But we have closed a gap with opportunity and alliance in both ELA and math. The Hartford and Opportunity District rates of growth in math are higher, but they're still lower than last year. The shape of graphs, right there, they still show those similar trends. And when we look at 23-24, the ELA average percent target achieved overall exceeded the 2018-2019 pre-pandemic rate. In ELA, English Language Arts, the rate for our high needs and our multilingual students, it did return to pre-pandemic progress. However, we see that our students with disabilities struggled most to meet their growth targets. In math, multilingual learners perform similar to students overall, which shows that, for example, the resources that we have put in place. There was work for some of you that remember, relative to curriculum and additional capacity building for our educators. Still, lots of ground to cover and recover. In our next slide, this is chronic absenteeism, which the state also shared in their recent release of their data. A reminder to our viewers that chronic absenteeism, students are considered chronically absent if they miss 10% or more of the school year, and that's equals to 18 days. I know for board members, we did have a presentation on this in August. We know that we just can't realize the improvements, and we can't close the gaps. We can't close the access and outcome gaps if our students are not in school every day, right? Engaged in their learning. And so we continue to try to re-engage our students. And when you look across the state, like it holds true for the state and the city of Hartford relative to the results. Trends for the state alliance opportunity districts, like they show that chronic absenteeism has continued to improve, and we're actually recovering at somewhat similar rates. We have improved our chronic absenteeism rate nearly 11 percentage points since it peaked at 46% in 21-22, and we had an increase of almost 4% since the previous school year. And still, we know that we have a ways to go. And you might remember the visual of all the grades that we showed, and the way that it curves, right? Where a kindergarten, for example, is anywhere from 20 to 23, 24%. Then it reduces and then it goes back up again. So yes, improvement, and still lots of work to do. In the next slide, and another metric, if you will, and this one relative to ninth grade success, which we know the research and our experience confirms that ninth grade success is so critical for staying on track, graduating, and persisting post-secondarily. A student is considered to be on track if they earn at least 6 credits by the end of grade 9. Our rate is slightly down from last year, and still behind the pre-pandemic rate by about 2 percentage points. We don't yet have a comparison for the state overall or for other districts, right? That's data that we're waiting to be released. And in the next slide, this is our graduation overview. And just as a reminder to our viewers that graduation rates are reported, I don't want to use the word delayed, but it's like a year behind. And so the district did demonstrate for the 3rd consecutive year improved graduation outcomes with a 5 percentage point increase over the 2022 cohort graduation rate. Actually, the district did outperform opportunity districts by 2.5 percentage points, and kind of diminished the graduation rate gap with the state overall from 17.6 percentage points in 2018 to 10 percentage points in 2023. That is great. And we know that we have still a lot of work to do. And just to give additional context, right, 12th graders, trying to think about the 12th graders that ended their 8th grade experience in 2019, 2010, with the year that was kind of cut abruptly, and you know what happened after that. So I think we might continue to see the impact of that as the years go by. If we look at the next slide, this is also graduation rate data. We also saw great progress in minimizing the gaps across all of our student groups. This was actually a few years ago, a request of board members to ensure that we are being explicit in how we look at our data relative to our subgroups in alignment with our resource allocation. So here, relative to some of our improvements, we have, for example, multilingual learners, which is up 15 percentage points from the class of 2022 and nearly 20 percentage points from 2018. And just as a reminder to one of the initial slides, right, we saw last year an increase in 5% of our multilingual students. Over, I think it's now we're at 84 different languages that are spoken. And our students with disabilities is also up with a 10 percentage point increase from 2022. And in the last slide, and then I'll pause, this is from our climate and culture surveys. And so you can see here our targets for these categories up at the top of the slide, right? We're aiming for family perception, 93%, student perception, 62%, and student and staff, 78.5%. The first section is from families reporting how their child feels about supports at school. You'll see that the responses are mostly positive, with some respondents saying they strongly agree, but there's still work to be done to surpass that that goal that we had of 93%. We saw a big leap in students who feel connected to school, up 24 percentage points from the previous year, and students and staff feeling safe from harm, which rose 12 percentage points from the previous year. And these were questions specifically that we were focused on based on conversations with the board. I'm going to pause there before going into some of the proficiency and grade level data, just to see if there are any questions or clarifications, and or we continue and do it later. I'm just going to pause right now. Oh, I see. Chairperson, back to you.
Thanks, Superintendent. Mr. Tatum.
Thank you. I just have one quick question about the overall district overview data with the numbers of students, with the district at a glance numbers there. The 1,573 total teachers listed. I'm wondering if that is the total teachers that are kind of budgeted positions for, or if that's the number of teachers that are currently employed and in schools.
Not, it is budget, not employed.
Do you happen to know offhand roughly how many vacancies there are?
Deputy Foster, are you on, just so that I can have the latest? I know that we have about, last time, close to 90 that were in the special ed realm.
Yeah, you're asking specifically special ed. I mean, across the
No, you could do
board,
all of them, but that was the number that was coming out.
because of today, our teacher vacancies were at 194, of which between 75 and 80 are either special education or speech language.
And some of the other, Mr. Tatum, you're not asking this question, but while we're at it, I can talk about like some of the other groups. TESOL, for example, is another one, math and science, which all have implications, for the conversations that we're having tonight relative to not just outcomes in general, but specific groups of students that have a higher level of need.
You're saying that other areas that are sort of disproportionately represented among vacancies are in TESOL and math and science?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And we will also have a workshop coming up on how we're doing relative to the vacancies, but that data is readily available. And so we can also share that with you.
Thank you.
No, say any other questions, Superintendent, you can go on.
Thank you. Okay, so we looked at growth already in a few slides before relative to SBAC, the Smarter Balance Assessment. Now we'll dive a little bit into proficiency. And as we previously saw, the pattern between the state and our peer districts is the same. Either stagnant or a slight decrease in the English language arts proficiency and a slight increase in the math proficiency. And I was just responding to Mr. Tatum's question around vacancies, right? Teacher shortages in math has been an issue, a challenge for us. The shortage is, okay, so math is an issue, and when you overlay the shortage in the available special education teachers, for example, that has a disproportionate impact on districts like Hartford with over, right, 20 or 21% of our students that are students with that have additional needs. And that certainly shows up in our numbers. And well, it shows up in our numbers, and it shows up in the experience that our educators that are here are having too. I want to acknowledge that as well. And so let's dive into some more data in our next slide, please. So when we look across the grades, grade 3 showed the most improvement. So again, think back to timeline. Consider the timing. Students who were tested in their 3rd grade last year were in kindergarten during the height of the pandemic. They had a sort of normal, if you will, 1st grade, which is something that these other grades here really did not experience. The other grades didn't experience as like their entry. I guess we can kind of filter through all the grades and where they were, but it's something that came to mind relative to 3rd grade and being the most improved. Let's look at math. In the next slide, please. So in math, most grade levels are showing improvement, again, toward that 2018, 2019 pre-pandemic rates of performance. Grade 3 and grade 4 students actually exceeded the 18-19 performance rates. Grade 5 and grade 6 students are closing the gap. But when we look at the grade 7 and grade 8 students, right, those are the ones that we see here are struggling, right, to rebound compared to others. I'm gonna pause there because I see a question, and I don't want to go into SAT.
Go ahead, Mr. Walker.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies, I'm obviously showing up midstream. I did have a question just following along. The target proficiency numbers, did you describe where the target proficiency for math and ELA were derived? Is that a state number, or the like 12.8 for math and then the 17.7, I think, is, I just want to know the source of that.
Yeah, so we worked, right. We worked, Mr. Walker, with the state on specific targets. Actually, the state works with us on, at one point, we had like 10 years of targets for that incremental growth. The one thing that we did differently than the state was the growth target, where we had a 100% target, which I know this was feedback that was given to me relative to goals that are achievable or realistic goals. And I agree. And that was a different one that we set, thinking that we want all of our students to reach. And you saw that, for example, the state has a 70, the state target is 75. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes, Superintendent, you're answering my question, because I thought there was an overall goal, but what you're describing here is that this was our like improvement target, but not the actual reading target, and that's why I just wanted to clarify that. And if you want to, you can repeat again what the actual like desired target is. The state
Well,
puts
the state through the requirement, the SL requirement that I spoke about earlier, right, we have accountability metrics, and we work with the state to kind of map those out relative to like what is doable, what they project students' growth should be year over year.
Okay.
What we did also differently, in addition to having the state identified targets, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had acceleration goals. We had like an acceleration plus goal, because we knew that given the pandemic, we weren't going to likely, back then we were thinking we're likely not going to hit even the state identified target because of, right, the impact of the pandemic. So we identified, I don't know if you remember this, Mr. Walker, these conversations, we identified a acceleration goal and acceleration plus goal. So we've had different iterations, but the one that is set by the state, if you will, continues to be the one that we go by, is the one that we have conversations about with the state during our quarterly meetings and our end of year meetings.
Yeah. Thank you. Now that clarified it. And just outside the meeting, yeah, I'll gather from you what they were, and just so I can keep it in my head, because we've talked about so many numbers occasionally. I just want to make sure that I'm grounded in these are agreed upon target with the state that we're obligated to make. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no other questions, Superintendent, you can move on.
Thank you. Okay, so we are shifting now to SAT for our high schoolers. And SAT has decreased in both ELA and math at the state level and for peer districts. The important note that SAT testing has become optional. Right, some colleges still have optional. I know that some are moving away from that. Nonetheless, we have made we've had efforts to increase our participation, because for our students, many depend on the SAT to become eligible for scholarships. So you can see here that we track either at or above opportunity districts in both subjects. And then in our next slide, and this, I just want to remind everyone, this is data that we haven't confirmed. High school students were also measured by the opportunities that students have to participate in courses that prepare them for their future college and career success. Example, dual enrollment, partnerships with our colleges and universities. So we spent a lot of time in the past couple of years, like increasing the awareness of our students with our high school partnership programs, right? So that they can get a head start on their college experience. This is something that our team, Ms. Cuevas is on the line here, working with our counselors and across all of our schools. So the headline we can see here, surpassed our goal by over 10 percentage points. And really what I think that shows is that I think our students are hungry and want to have access. And I know that I'm hoping that into this year, we're able to offer our students more. I know that, for example, Capital Community College had taken a year off relative to dual enrollment. I know I learned today in speaking with their CEO that they're going to go before their board to have the board approval to begin to offer that for students. And so we should see this opportunity be available to students. But still, right, it is an area that we are proud of and will continue to focus on. So I'm going to pause there. That is the overview. That is the presentation. Pause for any questions and or comments.
Ms. Ledger.
Yes, good evening. Thank you so much for that presentation. I was just wondering, Superintendent, if you could just restate the percentage with regards to the teachers of color, if that has, what that, was and what it is now.
Yes, that is slide 5, Ms. Santiago. 23, we were at 23%, 23 to 27 to 30. And then relative to the state, I believe the state was at 8%, and they're now at 11%. And you might remember some of the very targeted work that we did around our campaigns and all, the other additional recruitment. Still have a long ways to go, but definitely an improvement.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Mr. Walker.
Thank you. For the superintendent, just again, clarification. I saw the comparisons between the state and alliance district and opportunity districts. Hartford is in the group of alliance districts, right? That's our group of comparison, typically, right?
Yes, and we're also an opportunity district.
Well, then that's also actually just 1 minute. Like, help me understand, like, who's in that bucket? Because that term I was a little less familiar with than alliance. Who's in that opportunity, like cohort?
It's a 10 lowest performing, if you will, highest need students, districts.
Okay. I get to, whether it be rural, urban, doesn't make a difference. Just
Right. Remember, it's relative to the level of need, the concentrated need.
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't
All
know
right.
if you might have I don't know when you jumped on, but if you go, Ms. Santiago, to slide 6. right? Just the context setting there is students that are considered high needs, which is like the super group that the state uses for analysis, right? And so it's students that kind of meet one or more
Mhm.
of the criteria, including multilingual students, students with disabilities, or students that live in low income household. And so, right, when you use those criteria and you overlay the fact that we have such a higher concentration of need compared to other districts, and so opportunity districts have the highest concentration of need, if you will.
I understand. Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Tatum?
Thank you. At first, just piggybacking off that question, if the opportunity districts are the 10 highest need, lowest performing districts, the alliance districts are,
They're still, I think there's a group of 34, 36 that have the disproportionate need, but the concentration is, kind of sets apart.
got it, thank you.
Then you overlay funding streams, right? Alliance grants and additional funding that comes in to the districts.
Great, thank you. And my question, I was struck by the consistency of the trends across like lots of these different achievement measures, both in comparison with other districts in the state and in achievement over the past, years since the pandemic. My question is, like, are you aware of any conversations or initiatives at the state level that are trying to address some of these trends that are different from what has been done in the past years? Like, is there any talk about doing something about these trends beyond what has been done up to this point?
One thing I know that there was the right to read legislation, the Right to Read Act. The way that kind of played out is not the word. The impact that it had on the work that we were trying to do for Harvard at Harvard Public Schools. So that is focused on early literacy, and it is right in alignment with the research on like the science of reading. And Hartford had actually tried to get ahead of, before we even knew that there would be folks were working on the right to read legislation. We looked at the science of reading and training some of our team members. This is right before the pandemic, and so we invested in a group of coaches to get 10 to 20, I don't recall the number, of coaches to get a 2-year intense professional development. And we were going to do that so that then we can focus on the curriculum. And we did the extensive work as per our policy, Mr. Tatum, to engage with stakeholders. And the board approved. It was a collaborative process. We approved the Wit and Wisdom curriculum and Springboard for our our secondary 6 and above grades. However, when the right to read legislation was passed, we had to pause our efforts and then wait for the waiver process at the state level. There was a waiver process. And so we essentially, we were delayed by a year and a half because we had to, submit the waiver and go through all that process. Nonetheless, I think that's an answer to your question relative to literacy, Mr. Tatum, at the state level. And so for us, that means that we are a year delayed. So our Wit and Wisdom curriculum was supposed to be rolled out last year when we had all of our coaches that were here with ESSER funding to have that solid foundation And that, it didn't happen that way. And so we have less coaches now while we're rolling out a curriculum. We were in a better place the years before with math. We had rolled out our math curriculum and had done a lot of work to support, because we see that in our data. We were only able to roll out our Springboard ELA last year. So we're ahead there last year. But the curriculum, you don't roll out curriculum and provide support just one year, right? It is a continual process. So I gave you more than what you asked for in that answer. I apologize, but I'm still feeling a certain way about the right to read and the work that we were doing around our curriculum and the timing of all of that.
That's a helpful answer, and it resonates. I experienced the beginnings of that, and yeah, thank you for your answer. It's helpful.
Ms. Brody?
Thank you. I know, like, we often talk about minority teachers, recruitment, all of those things. But if you could just briefly describe, like, because we all know where the educators of color are graduating from, mainly HBCUs, right? So in conversations in the community, folks think it's easy to just say, they're graduating, get them to come here. And it is way more complicated than that. That is, if that was the only thing we had to do, is seek out those who graduated and just bring them to Hartford, Connecticut and get them on board, we would not have this issue. So if you could just briefly describe our struggle in that and why we can't just get those teachers of color, which we know make impact, right? Your teacher, folks look like you. That's very, very, that relevancy helps our students relate culturally and all of that. We know that has impact on learning, but no one talks about the legislation piece. Like, it's you can't take that praxis that you passed in North Carolina and just come and teach in Connecticut. So while we still want that, and at times pressure, get us some teachers of color, but if you could just explain briefly that part to help us understand that is not just that easy.
I can, yes, and I'll tag in Dr. Ratley as well. And I'll preface by saying that it's diversifying our workforce and diversifying our workforce with high quality educators as well. It is not as simple. I know that, and I give kudos to the state because there was work done, and so reciprocity now is available in more states. Before, I mean, we went into the pandemic without those, and we wanted to go to places, and folks were like, well, we can't because there's too many hurdles to get that certification, some of the requirements to align. The other piece is that we are competing with essentially, I think about folks, there's Washington, D.C., and there's Boston, and there's New York, and so then there's Connecticut, and then there's Hartford. We're competing with our peer districts, right? We know that just from a compensation perspective, we know that our educators we have to, and they deserve to be, right, compensated at a higher level. And we have gone down to recruit in two HBCUs, for example. And it's not, to your point, as easy. And then say we do get right to have them join us, then is right doing the work also internally, because we know that recruiting is part of it. Then is, once they're with us, right, what are the conditions in the schools to create an environment in which our educators feel, right, that they're supported, and that their needs are met within the context of, as a matter of fact, the slide that we have up, within the context of who we are as a district, with a higher concentration of need. So yes, Miss Brody, we have the efforts, and so do many others. And then it's not just the effort of the recruitment, right? There are all these other elements that we also have to tend to. Dr. Ratley, I don't know if there's anything else you wanna add to that. I mean, we tried with incentives, right? Incentives that were made possible through pandemic relief funds. We are still doing some incentives for those hard to fill areas, special education, math, TESOL. And still we don't come close. Well, it's not the same to what some of our districts locally are offering. Sorry, Dr. Ratley, I don't know if you were gonna.
Oh no, you were very thorough. The only other thing that I would probably add is just the challenge behind attraction to the field for all the purposes that you both just mentioned. And additionally, paths to certification or licensing. So being able to look at alternative ways to get or fast track those who may be interested into those roles as educators, I think are some other things that we could potentially try to look toward as well.
Mr. Wilson?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Superintendent, could you just do me a favor and quickly speak to the 2% of students who are without housing, permanent housing? How are we identifying these students, and what supports, if any, are we providing to these families?
Yes, great question. And it is another subgroup that we actually, as I reflect on this presentation, we could do better at disaggregating the data by that subgroup, Mr. Wilson. So we have, so students that are in that category are students that do not have a place to a residence, students that are in transitionary homes, students that even if it's for 1 day, 1 week, that they don't have a place to be. Some of our students that are what they call couch surfing, right? They don't live at home, but they might live with one friend for a couple of days and another friend for the following week. All of those qualify under the McKinney-Vento Act. And so they qualify for transportation. For example, if a family does not have a secure place to live at the moment, and they are in a shelter in another town, which happens frequently, that there are vouchers that are given to families in Manchester and Vernon. And so our team in the Welcome Center works to coordinate transportation. There are additional resources that are provided for students, like tutoring supports. Sometimes we have to, we identify clothing, uniform, referral supports to community-based organizations, vouchers, recommendations for the Harper Housing Authority, for example, to determine if a family can get a voucher. So a lot of resources under the McKinney-Vento Act, Mr. Wilson, for the student and the family.
And are we identifying them through is that the identification of these students that dependent on the administration at the schools? And how do we ensure that we're sort of getting to all of them? Like, is there a concerted effort?
That's a great question. So we get from different places. So sometimes it is at the school level. Sometimes a teacher alerts the administration, and that kicks in the process with the team, our coordinator, our homeless coordinator liaison in our welcome center. Sometimes it is at the families directly. They do not let the school know, and they directly come to the welcome center. Other times is we learn from other providers that might be working with the family and providing another level of support that we might not be aware of externally. Sometimes it is in partnership with the Department of Children and Families. I suspect, and even as I reflect in my own years as the principal, that there are students that we don't know about, that have been in the situation, and we stumble upon it. So we try to communicate to families that these are the services that are available. For some families, they do not share directly. So I would guess that there are families that we don't know about that are in some of these circumstances, and or students, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Darcel Ledger?
Yes, thank you so much once again for the presentation. And I wanted to say a couple of things. It's unfortunately being a Black teacher, certified teacher in Connecticut, I choose to be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem with the teacher shortage situation. And I firmly believe that you can't be what you can't see. So I want to say the state actually made it very difficult to not so much to verify, but there are programs that are out there. There are scholarships that are out there to help of color to get certain licenses. However, it's very difficult for Connecticut. For some reason, it's not so much about the standards, but it's okay.
Looks like we might have lost.
Oh, am I back?
I think so.
Okay, you can hear me now. I'm sorry, I'm going.
Ms. Darcel Ledger, are you still there? Maybe we can circle back. Yeah, maybe we can circle back on that. Are there any other questions from the board? Superintendent, this was fantastic information. Thank you for going in depth. I know we've seen a lot of these numbers already in the last couple of weeks or months here, but this was very helpful. So thank you very much. And then I will let you go on. I think there's the next agenda item is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to try our first micro learning session. And it is in the name micro because it's supposed to be a shorter presentation. This was this for some context conversations about how do we have our board, especially the new board members, kind of get some context relative to some of the work that we're doing. And so we were thinking that either at a committee meeting that we could save time for a micro session, which is 20 to 30 minutes of learning about something separate from the workshops that are like more in depth. So if we can, so micro session, and this is an aerial view of, is a work in progress. So I welcome your feedback. What a micro learning session is to provide a very brief and targeted overview. Example, it could be a strategy, an initiative, or a program. Whereas the board workshop is to facilitate a much deeper exploration and conversation. And trying to differentiate, in addition to like the timing, because micro learning is quick, briefer, brief, shorter in time. But the objective for the micro learning is I want to make sure that board members have a foundational understanding of like, what is it that we're doing, and who is responsible for doing the work, who's carrying the work, and then giving you information so that you can begin to have conversation in the community, for example, about it. And then the board workshop gets into the nitty-gritty with, like, why are we doing it? How? When is it happening? When is the launch of this? When do we do a step back to assess how we're doing? And so today, while it's not going to be 20 to 30 minutes, I wanted to kind of get us started in practicing the micro learning session, and almost kind of doing a circling back to the conversation relative to tiered supports and the structure for alternative programming, keeping in mind that last time we reviewed the OPP contract. And so I thought, okay, well, let's review alternative programming, especially at our comprehensive high schools. And then perhaps even if, there's any lingering question about the OPP contract. So I'm going to tag in Dr. Ratley and Ms. Cuevas, maybe, or Dr. Ratley, get us started. And if you can talk about our alternative programs and our structure for those.
Yes, thank you, Superintendent. First off, I just want to acknowledge the work of team members Jen Hoffman, Sherry Davis-Gooch, Liliana Cuevas, and I know the OPP leadership team was with us as well last week and shared some details in the previous meeting. Tonight, we'll just take a second look at how we as a district approach this tiered system of support as it relates to alternative programming. So very generally speaking, it is commonplace for us educators to use tiered supports for students who are in need. And so what we've done is applied this to our system for alternative programming. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. And so just to give you a broad overview, Tier 1 is essentially for all students, services, practices, whatever that's available to all students. Tier 2 would be identified for a subset of students for which additional supports are needed within whatever context we're using or referring to. And in this case, we're looking at alternative programming. When we think about Tier 3 would be those services and supports that are specifically or requiring support for the most intensive level of supports are students with the highest level of need. So again, this idea of tiering can be applied in different types of scenarios, and for the purpose of this evening, we're looking at it through alternative programming. I will now turn your attention to our Tier 1. And you see the two categories there, freshman academy and career pathways. So again, when we think about what all students have access to in terms of not just alternative programming, but engaging students in their educational experiences, our freshman academy is basically based on research-based supports to facilitate students' transition into high school. And then secondly, as a tier 1 model, our career pathways are theme and work-based experiences that are aligned to high demand industries. I'm just kind of summarizing some of the language that's on the slide for you now. So that's available to all students. Now we go down to tier 2 and thinking about students who may need additional support outside of what everyone gets or that they would be getting in a gen ed or a general session. So the first, 9th and 10th grade math and ELA intervention. If we think about why our students may not be engaging, it could be that they need additional academic supports, and those supports are built into the academic program. Secondly, as a tier 2 level of support would be our student success centers. So the student progresses through the day going to classes as they normally would, but they also spend time within that academic day in the student success center getting some individually tailored their needs met through targeted intervention for credit recovery. So this is that first attempt. Okay, you slipped behind. Now we're going to try to catch you up in the regular routine of the day as you would normally experience it. As we go on further, we know that for some students, this still is not enough. The need is just higher. And so that's where we go to tier 3. And tier 3, two are outlined here, Hope Academy, and this is where Opportunity Academy falls. So for Hope Academy, they're staff trained in project-based learning. There tends to be a lower adult to student ratio. But then when we get to Opportunity Academy, we're specifically looking at those students who have, for some reason, falling so far behind in credits that they're now over age for where they should be in their academic career. So that's where the term over age, undercredited. The students have to be at least 17 years of age. So that's kind of a checkpoint for ourselves. We're not putting the 15-year-olds in there and out there. You at least have to be 17 years of age. And undercredited is defined as 11 credits or fewer. The Opportunity Academy, as I'm sure you heard last week in depth, is just around offering youth development support and post-secondary prep opportunities. They also focus on the project-based learning approach as well. So that's an overview of the tiers and specifically how Opportunity falls into the continuum for how we move toward or try to engage our students in their educational experience, particularly when they slip behind or fall behind. At the very bottom, you can see additional supports that are noted in the way of our credit diploma program, which is an alternative route for fulfilling graduation requirements, as well as our adult ed center, which is, as it mentioned, for our adult learners. Next slide, please. Thank you. As this ties to the OPP Academy or Opportunity Academy, just sharing once again the steps that are entailed in actually the handover from our school to Opportunity Academy. Again, the criteria listed at the top points out 17 years of age is kind of where we look, and if there are fewer than 11 credits earned. The enrollment steps are identified very specifically, and just noting that we also take into account if a student has an IEP and what additional steps we need to put in place to try to ensure that that child is successful. At the very bottom, you will note that the Executive Director of Post-Secondary Success and Alternative Programs, Ms. Liliana Cuevas, who you met last week, reviews all of these referrals, help to get in contact with these families, and then transfer those families over to OPP. The transfer is not just transactional. The transfer is a conversation. It is an intimate interview with the family to then hand over to OPP, where they then pick up for the next steps. Finally, what I'll add is that at this point in time, we know that there are 47 students that are enrolled in OPP, and there are 32 students and families who are undergoing that transfer process with the interviews and so forth. So they will also be transferred to the program. Out of that number, we know right now that 20 students are eligible for graduation, meaning that they have enough credits right now to feasibly graduate by the end of this year. A little bit different from how we look at cohort graduation and are you in your right grade, but just looking at how many credits do they have now, and with this project-based learning approach, how many can you get by the end of the year that makes sense in order for you to graduate by the end of this school year. Also, as mentioned previously, our staff talked about bi-weekly meetings with OPP and quarterly meetings with OPP. And I will just add that they will continue to lean in throughout the year to monitor and engage the students' academic progress and students' engagement throughout the year to ensure that students are moving along and getting where they need to be in the time that's determined for their educational career. I'll pause there and just turn it back over to you, Superintendent, or Board Chair Hockenhall.
Then the one thing that I would add is how these programs, when you look at the tiers, right? The freshman academy, the additional support, but specifically the student success centers, have helped our students get back on track and actually graduate, which tie directly to the improvements that we have seen in our graduation. Our graduation rates are all three of our comprehensive high schools have seen increases in their graduation rates.
Thank you, Dr. Ratley. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. How many over/under kids do we have over age under accredited in the city?
Board Member Wilson, I would love to get you an accurate count. And so therefore I can circle back to you with that information. When we think about over age and undercredited, there's a couple of other criteria that we need to measure against, and that's like when the student has entered high school, what cohort they're in. And so I'd like to circle back to you to get you a more accurate number on that one. You think about that.
When we do identify these kids, the students, what does the process of trying to, because if they've dropped out, what does the process look like in terms of trying to get in touch with them? Or better yet, what is like an average time frame? Are we spending a large amounts of time trying to find the kids, so that we can get them into the right programs? What does that sort of look like? You give me a kind of better picture of that.
Yes, and on the call, we have Ms. Cuevas who could give some of that on the ground understanding of what staff actually does to get students back engaged. We also have Chief Corinne Barney, who works with our ACE team for students who are not engaged. What are some of the action steps we take? So I'll just turn it over to either of them.
Sure. Good evening, all. Part of the process, as we try to re-engage our students through, through our students are identified through the ACE team meetings that we have weekly within our comprehensive high schools, where their students are identified. And there's several things that happen. One, phone calls, parent meetings, and home visits. Sometimes all three happen. Sometimes it's just take one phone call to get the parent to come in, have a parent meeting, and find out what are some of the things, some of the concerns, and what are the things happening to ensure that we can place the student in the right program to be able to address not only their academic needs, but their social emotional needs.
And do you find that time, the time frame for sort of that evaluation is can be quick? Can it be long? I'm trying to ascertain, for example,
Sure.
give you a scenario. If a kid is identified in October, for example, how long does that process take to get them into a program that may fit them?
Well, that's a great question, and really does depend.
And I know it varies, so
Right,
yeah.
right, it varies, but I would say anywhere from the time that the student has been identified, I would say the time frame will be about 2 weeks, right? By the
2
time we
weeks.
get the parent in, we
Okay.
have a third meeting by the time we ensure that the student is re-engaged. And then whether the referrals are made, whether it's to Opportunity Academy or Hope Academy or another program. So I would say
Right.
about 2 weeks.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
Really quickly, please, Board Member Wilson, in relation to your question about the number of overage undercredited students, just to make sure we're clear, you're talking about within Hartford Public Schools, correct?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Was that helpful? Board
Yes,
member?
it was. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, that's okay. You're welcome.
Mr. Walker?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Chief Riley, good discussion about the tiers. I do want to request that the number of students be shared with the rest of us on the board, because I had a question about that, particularly as it relates to OPP, because at the 660 that we're paying them, 660,000, we seem like we pay for 75 minimum, right? Because at the $8,800 a student, I think that was the number. So and they reported they served 108 students. So I just was kind of trying to figure out who keeps tracks of these numbers to make sure that or is it a situation where they don't spend all the money if they don't serve all the students? It just was unclear if they just get this 660 regardless, or are they guaranteed 75 students for that number? Or so let me leave that to you if you have insights on that, and then share the data that you find with all of us. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So you want not only the data to be shared with everyone, but you're just trying to get some insight into what happens if we fall below that 75 threshold or above that 75 threshold?
Well, yeah, to understand how it's tracked, I mean, the way that the contract is written, it guarantees service for 75 students, and there seemed to be some type of provision for reassessment if somehow they're given sufficiently above 75 students, and there seems to be some revisiting of the program totals. So it just would, what wasn't clear there is the tie back into the district leadership somehow to show how the numbers are tracked, so we know we got 75 students there, or if not, how that all is happening, or what triggers us to give them more money. That just wasn't clear in their presentation.
Understood. I know that 660 also includes their administration costs, but I will tag in Chief Davis Gouge, who will have some insight on that as well.
Good evening, all. I'm sorry for my camera, but I can certainly have a question. So again, as Deputy Ratley just shared, the 660 does include the administrative costs. And so we talked about the biweekly meetings where we're monitoring the enrollment. And so at that point, monthly, we look at those numbers and decide at any point in time, did they go over the 75 student threshold? So whether they've touched students, more than 75 students per year, but it really depends on who they're serving at a given time. Does that help, Mr. Walker?
Yeah, it does. Um, it maybe if if you have those biweekly and monthly meetings, maybe like what I'm saying is if I could see some trends over a year, it would make sense. Because part of what wasn't clear is why they touch 108. Like what's the average number of students they actually touch? Because my feeling was that, I mean, they touch some kids for only 1 month, some kids all year. But I get what you're saying though. Every month you're seeing it. I think what you're trying to say is that every month they touch at least 75 students, and maybe a different 75 as the year goes on. But I'm guessing you said that every month you guys look to see, are they actually working with 75 students? Would that be
Actually,
accurate?
so, yeah, I would say it varies, right? It could be in the first quarter where we just heard Dr. Ratley say right now there's 47 students, right? And so those 47 students, this month, they will still get paid the quarterly rate of the 660 based on the 47 students plus their administrative costs. So that's fixed. So whether it's 47 or 75, the 75 includes the administrative costs. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The quarter payment of the 660 is still included in that quarterly cost.
And,
right?
and that's what I thought.
Yes.
So they
So,
get paid that whether they serve 75 or not.
yep, because the contract says that their administrative cost is a part of that 660, right? So their teachers, their staffing. So that part is included. But what I will say, as Mr. Rivera shared with us, so there is like engagement periods where you can have a student who stays 2 quarters and for whatever reason, then decides to remove themselves for the program. Or they're following our guidelines based on the lack of engagement and attendance, and then they go through the withdrawal process following our protocols. But there's an ongoing, continuing enrollment process that we work together on. As you heard Dr. Ratley say, there's 32 kids in the pipeline. So that's how that number continues to shift throughout the 4 quarters.
Okay, so then I think I'll end here. So I guess my request is then just share with us, like over the course of the past year, what would give us a snapshot that month to month, a quarter to quarter, so we can get a better picture of how many students they're really serving as you go through the year. Because I think that their end of year aggregate just doesn't tell the picture enough of the work they're actually doing.
Yep, understood.
Okay.
We have that data.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, team, I thought we had that data recently somewhere, so we can turn that around fairly quickly.
Any other questions from the board? Ms. Brody?
I do. So even if, so we were throwing around 2 different numbers, 75 and 100 and some number, that number.
If I may, Chair Hockenhall, if I may. I believe that was a number taken off the chart for 22-23. Mr. Walker, I think that's where you pulled that number from.
So we are served, so is it up to 75 students?
Yes, so that number represented the number of students that came through OPP's doors in that current year. It was the number of distinct students that were enrolled throughout the course of the year.
Okay. What number is going to be for this upcoming meeting? Do we know that right offhand?
When you say this meeting, you mean this?
Not meeting. Yeah. So so what is the number 75? Like, what number do we use to determine the contract with them? Is there a fixed number?
The fixed number, yes, is 75. At this
Okay.
point, we know that there are 47 enrolled and 32 in the pipeline, which would bring us to 79. And then that's where, moving forward, there's the monthly and the quarterly checkpoints to say, okay, did anyone drop out? Are there other students that need the services? And we will collect that ongoing throughout the year.
Okay, and even if we use raw numbers, right, and we don't even include, like, aside from like factoring in the administrative stuff, even it isn't the cost though per pupil lower than what our schools have? Like, when we say what number does a student come with, that number doesn't even come close to that number. So let's keep that in perspective too. For the service of the student that they are servicing with those challenges, I am not an OP advocate. That is not what I'm doing, because I am familiar with a program from in the community, but I don't know any of those people over there. So I just want to make that statement. What we are paying them for the population of students and the challenges they have is nowhere near what our schools get for just a regular ed student. We get more for less challenged students. We're giving OPP to deal with highest challenges. So I just want to put that in perspective. If just me doing raw numbers and not even saying anything administrative, just 75, the contract and how much that is per pupil, it comes nowhere close. I just wanted to state that.
Mr. Wilson?
Just since we're on the subject specifically about OPP, is the rate per student, does it change depending on if the student has an IEP?
No, it does not.
Okay.
But
I'm sorry. Chief
So it
Davis,
doesn't
you
go
want
into-
to add some more context?
Yes, so there is a provision, and it's for all service programs, that service providers are able to bill back to the district the special ed costs for their services. So that does happen with PP as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Walker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to keep harping on OPP, but since we've talked about this financial breakdown, Chief Bradley or Davis Cooch, who tracks what happens to the remainder of the money? I think, and what I'm saying is, I believe Board Member Brody is correct. Each of these students certainly brings to the district more than $8,800. While I'll accept that's what we pay OPP, what becomes of the remainder of the money that student brings to the district? Do we keep it? Is it tracked, or how does that work?
I think there's some further context that's needed here that perhaps Deputy Foster could help lean in. It's not as clean as we get a check for each kid, but maybe you could provide some context around that funding piece.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, it isn't, what you said is exactly right, Dr. Bradley. It's not, we don't get a check per student, right? Per pupil breakdown is useful as an analytical tool. And I agree with what Ms. Brody said, that the amount we are providing to OPP for these students is in fact less than what we receive in total per student. But it's not as simple as what happens to the remainder of the money, because it's not as though we have an account for each student, right? We have students who cost $125,000 a year based on the services they need. And obviously we then have students who cost, far less than that based on their level of need. And so it's not there's not really an accounting in that way you're describing.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That at least, okay. So it's not like we hold back some money or something. Okay.
Any other questions from board members? Wanted to circle back really quick. Ms. Saracel Ledger, are you able to come back on? Did you want to finish what you were trying to say earlier? She's still in a dead zone. Okay. Superintendent, anything else you wanted to add today?
No, thank you for your engagement tonight. And thank you, team, as well.
I echo that. Thank you, board members, for your questions and feedback tonight. It was very, very helpful. And Hartford Schools team, this was great. We really appreciate your time and effort that you put into this. It was very informative. So thank you. I love the format. I look forward to more in the future. So thank you. All right. Hearing nothing else, I adjourn the meeting of the workshop this evening. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening. Take care.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good evening.
Good night.